Hello, this is the Bible History School. This is the 11th session of Revelation and World History. At our Bible History School, we are serializing Revelation and World History in 12 chapters. We have finished the entire first chapter so far. In addition, the Bible History School is currently serializing Bible a Day to Great Acclaim. We are uploading a short video summarizing the 66 books of the Old and New Testaments one chapter a day. We would appreciate it if you could subscribe together. If you just read the Bible, there are many parts that are difficult to read and understand. It is much easier to understand the content if you watch a video that fits the situation rather than just reading the sentences. We made it into sentences that even middle and high school students can easily understand. Even for ordinary people who have difficulty reading the Bible due to their busy daily lives, it is good to meditate on one chapter of the Bible every day. We hope that you will encourage your children, parents, friends, and neighbors to read the Bible. Your support and encouragement has given us a lot of strength in producing Revelation and World History. This video is a collection of the entire video, from Chapter 1, Section 1 to 15, of Revelation and World History. Thank you for subscribing. Hello, this is the Bible History School. This session is the first part of Revelation and World History. In the future, I plan to explain the main themes found in Revelation by comparing them with historical facts that have actually occurred in world history. Next, I will provide you with the table of contents for the series on Revelation and World History. We plan to continue the series according to this table of contents. Please subscribe a lot. The introduction states that the book of Revelation is the most controversial book among the 66 books of the Bible that are currently recognized as canonical. Among the reformers, figures like Zwingli and Luther had doubts about the canonicity of Revelation, and it is also the only book of the Bible for which Calvin did not write a commentary. In modern times, the Church no longer questions the canonicity of Revelation. However, its interpretation remains a topic of controversy. The issue is whether the book of Revelation is a prophetic book or apocalyptic literature. If it is a prophetic book, it is interpreted that it was fulfilled at some point after the book of Revelation was written. Or if it has not yet been fulfilled, it will be fulfilled at some point in the future. On the other hand, the interpretation that the book of Revelation corresponds to apocalyptic literature means that the content recorded in the book of Revelation is not seen as prophecy. The perspective that views the book of Revelation as apocalyptic literature is one that no longer interprets the content of the book of Revelation, or the prophetic books of the Old Testament, as foretelling future events, that is, as prophecy. According to that interpretation, the Bible is not concerned with the future end, thousands of years later, but rather with the community of that time. In a world dominated by evil, where there seems to be no glimmer of hope, apocalyptic literature proclaims that the world ruled by evil will soon come to an end, and that God will directly defeat the forces of evil and save the saints. Therefore, the purpose of writing apocalyptic literature is not to inform people living thousands of years in the future about the end times, but rather to instill courage and hope in the suffering community of the present. In Revelation chapters 11 to 2, it states, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. This book does not describe various theological perspectives or interpretive methodologies regarding the book of Revelation. If what John wrote down is the book of Revelation, then the content of this book presents actual history. that appears to have the same or similar characteristics as the text recorded in the book of Revelation, arranged within the context of world history. The book of Revelation is interpreted not as apocalyptic literature, but as prophecy. Things that will surely happen are viewed as events that will occur within history, and they have been excavated from world history. As clearly mentioned in Revelation chapter 11, the book of Revelation is a message proclaimed in the name of Jesus Christ. The community formed in the name of Jesus Christ is the church. Therefore, we begin our investigation under the premise that the history of prophecy fulfillment is closely related to church history. We need to examine whether it is part of the 2,000 years of history that has passed, or if it is something yet to be fulfilled, and if not, whether we should understand the book of Revelation as apocalyptic literature, as theologians suggest, since the rapture theory proposed by Pastor Lee Jang Rim of the Da-Mi Mission Church on October 28, 1992, failed to materialize. The enthusiasm for studying the book of Revelation in the Korean church has significantly diminished. This is partly a relief that that day has passed without incident, but also due to a vague fear that studying the book of Revelation could lead to heresy. In fact, many places that are diligently teaching the book of Revelation have been declared heretical by the Korean church. In Revelation chapter 13, it is said, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." You must be able to read these words with your own eyes. What content is recorded in the text? Whether you can understand its meaning or not, each person must make an effort to read it with their own eyes. And you should listen carefully to what others interpret about that text. Each person has different views, and interpretations vary depending on theological positions or the denomination to which the scholar belongs. After making such comparisons, we need to examine how much their interpretations differ from my understanding of the text, and establish a standard for correct interpretation. Through the words of this prophecy, what is it that God wants to convey to humanity? I believe that realizing this and living a life that aligns with that purpose is the true duty of those who are God's people. The contents recorded in this book are not the theology of the book of Revelation. This is a record of the direct interpretation of history that states, "This history is the fulfillment of that prophecy." I hope that everyone reading this will open their eyes to see the history of Revelation that God has revealed and fulfilled. In the next session, we will explore the table of contents for the ongoing series on Revelation and world history, the second session of this topic. Thank you for your interest and subscription. This is the second session on the book of Revelation and world history. In this session, I will inform you about the table of contents for the upcoming series on the book of Revelation and world history. Table of contents. Chapter 1. The identity of the beast with 7 heads. Section 1. Symbolic terms of the book of Revelation and their historical realities. Section 2. Gog and Magog. Section 3. The Soviet Union. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Section 4. The Beast with 7 Heads. Section 5. The Duration of Babylon. Section 6. The Soviet Union and Russia. Section 7. The Establishment and Dissolution of the Soviet Union. Section 8. 5 have fallen, and 1 is. Section 9. The 8th King. Section 10. The 10 Horns. Section 11. The One who was dead and came back to life. Section 12. The Great City Babylon. Section 13. The Name of Mystery. Section 14. The nation drunk with the blood of saints, and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Section 15. The Red Beast. Chapter 2. The destruction of the great city Babylon. Section 1. 2 days. Section 2. The one who holds the sickle. At harvest time. Section 3. The Great Coalition, that destroys Babylon. Section 4. Each will return to their own people, to their homeland. Section 5. The Fail of Sesek. Section 6. The one seated as queen. Section 7. The merchants and craftsmen of Babylon. Section 8. Babylon divided into 3 parts. Chapter 3. 666, 666. Section 1. A beast with 2 horns like a lamb. Section 2. The number of the name. Section 3. Idol worship. Section 4. Is 666 the same as the Antichrist? Section 5. The day in 666. The meaning of the name. Chapter 4. The 144,000 sealed ones. Section 1. Is the number 144,000 a literal count? Section 2. The 144,000 and the organization of the Korean Church. Section 3. The rising sun and the Korean Peninsula. Section 4. The 12 tribes and the Korean Church. Section 5. The 7 churches of Asia. Section 6. The year of 1912. Section 7. The 2 witnesses. Chapter 5. The Jerusalem of the East. Section 1. The geographical features of Israel. Section 2. Countries divided by flowing rivers. Section 3. The Great Valley, created by earthquakes. Section 4. Matthew chapter 24, and the day of fleeing. Section 5. 2/3 will perish, and 1/3 will remain. Chapter 6. The Gog and the Magog. Section 1. The identity of the Gog and the Magog. Section 2. The cavalry of the Gog. Section 3. The army of the Gog and conquest wars. Section 4. Nations defeated by the army of the Gog. Section 5. The Gog in Babylon. Section 6. The invasion of Israel by the Gog. Section 7. 2 types of wars. Section 8. The name is known. Chapter 7. The War of Armageddon. Section 1. What is the War of Armageddon? Section 2. The Second World War. Section 3. 1/3 of humanity dies. Section 4. The Army of 200 million. Section 5. The Korean War. Section 6. Horrific wars and the influx of gold, silver and clothing. Section 7. The remnant among the nations. Section 8. The results of war. Section 9. Mount Megiddo, the Valley of Megiddo. The Hill of Megiddo. Chapter 8. The Star Fallen from Heaven. Section 1. The Dictator, who ruled the world. Section 2. The Dictator's Policy of Idolization. Section 3. Kim Il-sung and Stalin. Chapter 9. The Sins of the Korean Church. Section 1. The Day of Disaster. Section 2. The Sin Most Abominable to God. Section 3. The disaster resulting from crimes committed before God. Section 4. Not one stone will be left on another. All will be thrown down. Chapter 10. Restoration. Section 1. Judgment on Edom. Section 2. Alliance. Section 3. Restoration of the North Korean Church. Chapter 11. The Times and the Seasons. Section 1. Signs of the Times. Section 2. Sound of the Trumpet. Section 3. Fulfillment of Prophecy and the challenges facing the Korean Church will continue to be serialized. In this order, the Book of Revelation is a text that contains messages about the end times, providing many spiritual insights when connected to the flow of world history. In this video, we will examine the symbols of the Book of Revelation and historical events, contemplating how they relate to the changes in the modern world. The identity of the beast with 7 heads, the fall of Babylon, the meaning of 666, and the signs of the last days. We are witnessing significant events that occur in the conflict between good and evil. We will discuss the reality of prophecy revealed in modern world history and the mission of the church that follows it. In particular, we aim to reflect on the role of the Korean Peninsula, the prophesied message from the East, and the promise of restoration beyond the Armageddon war and disasters, as well as the faith and historical tasks given to us today. Hello, this is the Bible History School. This is the third session on the Book of Revelation and world history. From this session onward, we aim to take the first step towards approaching various themes that appear in the text of Revelation. In order to complete the overall picture, we will consider what the symbolic expressions, like the beast, in the text, refer to in actual history, and how we should approach finding their meanings. Chapter 1. The identity of the beast with 7 heads. Verse 1. The symbolic terms of Revelation and their historical realities. The key to solving the issues of Revelation is to find any nation that corresponds to the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that exists on earth. The nations referred to as beasts in the book of Daniel represent empires that have swallowed up various countries to establish a great nation. The process of a powerful nation occupying weaker ones to form a larger empire is likened to a strong beast devouring weak animals, and in the text of the prophecy, these empires are described as beasts. We need to identify the nation corresponding to this beast at the center of the prophecies recorded in the book of Revelation, to understand the reality of the nations being invaded and the persecution of God's people or the church by that nation. If the nation we are looking for has not yet appeared in the history of the earth, it would be a matter for the distant future, making it difficult for us living in the present to grasp its reality. However, if this nation already exists, or is among those that occurred at some point in the past, we must examine past world history to locate that nation. After carefully examining how the prophecies recorded in the biblical text have been fulfilled, understanding the meaning of those fulfilled prophecies can be considered the duty of Christians, especially when reading the prophetic books of the Bible, to understand the reality of history described in the book of Revelation. We must look at approximately 2,000 years of history, from the time it was written to the present. Events that occurred prior to that are not directly related to the fulfillment of the book of Revelation. However, since the terms expressed in the book of Revelation are similar to those recorded in the book of Daniel, knowing the historical context corresponding to the text of Daniel may serve as a shortcut to understanding the book of Revelation. The nations recorded in the book of Daniel and the prophetic books of the Old Testament are all empires that invaded Israel. The empires that occupied Israel include the Assyrian Empire, which destroyed northern Israel, the Babylonian Empire, which destroyed southern Judah, as well as the Persian Empire, the Hellenistic Empire of Alexander the Great, and finally the Roman Empire. Among them, the most frequently mentioned name is Babylon, and the book of Revelation also refers to the capital of that beastly nation as Great City Babylon, Revelation chapter 18, 2. Babylon, which shares the same name as the country, is the capital of the ancient Babylonian Empire, and the modern nation that stands on that land is Iraq. The prophetic books state that the day Babylon invades Israel is referred to as God's Day of Judgment, leading many scholars interpreting eschatology to believe that if Iraq invades or bombards Israel, that event will mark the beginning of the final war in the end times. However, the Bible describes the invading nation, in the context of prophetic interpretation, as a beast. Babylon is merely a symbolic title for the beastly nation that will become the central country, which will be the fulfillment of prophecy at some point in the future. Therefore, finding any country that exactly matches what is described in the text will be the first task in interpreting the prophetic writings. The writings I am producing here are not intended to explain the methodology of interpreting the book of Revelation. In the process of finding that beastly nation, rather than discussing methods of interpreting prophetic writings, I am using a method that seeks to identify the actual country that is thought to be that among many past histories, and directly applying it to the text. Then, by applying the interpretations corresponding to the remaining descriptions recorded in the text one by one, I aim to compare and analyze whether the country identified here corresponds to the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. This text should not be read quickly. I believe that it is advisable to read it carefully, comparing the text with actual history, examining each part step by step. First, let's read the description of the beast with 7 heads in the text. If we read Revelation chapter 13:1, it says, "I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads." In verse 2, the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's. His mouth was like that of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Verse 3, one of his heads seemed to have been mortally wounded, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled and followed the beast. Verse 4, the dragon gave the beast his authority, and they worshipped the dragon, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? Who is able to make war with him?" Verse 5, the beast was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to act for 42 months. Verse 6, the beast opened its mouth to blaspheme God, and to blaspheme his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Verse 7, it was also granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given to him over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. This is from Revelation chapter 13:1-8. Among the terms that appear in this passage, the most essential word is the expression, beast. This beast is the beast that rises up out of the sea. This beast is different from the beast that rises up out of the earth, Revelation 13:11-18, which has 2 horns like a lamb. The beast with the number of the name, 666. That is most contentious in the interpretation of the book of Revelation, is the beast with 2 horns rising from the earth, not the beast with 7 heads rising from the sea. The 2 beasts are separate nations. However, it is a fact that the 2 countries have a close relationship. It is clear that the 2 countries corresponding to the 2 beasts play the most central role in the interpretation of the book of Revelation. First, let us examine the identity of the beast that rises from the sea. The character and appearance of this beast are explained again in Revelation chapter 17. Let's take a look at the words of Revelation chapter 17. Verse 1, then one of the 7 angels, who had the 7 bowls, came and spoke to me, saying, "Come here. I will show you the judgment that the great harlot, sitting on many waters, is about to receive." Verse 2, the kings of the earth committed fornication with her, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And in verse 3, the Spirit carried me away into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. The beast's body is full of blasphemous names, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones and pearls, holding a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her fornication. On her forehead was written a name, a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. The angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast, with 7 heads and 10 horns, that carries her. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the abyss and go to destruction. Those who dwell on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life, since the foundation of the world, will marvel when they see the beast that was, and is not, and yet is to come." Verse 9. Here is the mind, which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Verse 10. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. Verse 11. The beast that was, and is not, is himself also the 8th king, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. Verse 12. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet. However, for a time, they will receive authority like kings alongside the beast. Verse 13. They were of one mind and gave their power and authority to the beast. Verse 14. They will wage war against the Lamb. But the Lamb is the Lord of lords and King of kings. He will overcome them, and those with him, called and chosen, will also overcome. Verse 15. And the angel said to me, "The waters you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages." Verse 16. The 10 horns you saw and the beast will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Verse 17. This is so that God may give them a heart to fulfill his purpose, and give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. Verse 18. And the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. This is the word from Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 to 18. Although the book of Revelation is written in symbolic terms, it actually explains its meaning within the text. This is in the form of one of the 7 angels, who have the 7 bowls, explaining the mystery to John. In verse 9 of chapter 17, it teaches that the 7 heads are 7 kings. In other words, you just need to find any country that was ruled by one of the 7. Any kings or power holders before it fell. However, in verse 10, it says, 5 have already fallen, 1 is currently here, and the other has not yet appeared. The present tense in this sentence indicates that the 6th king is currently ruling. Therefore, at least in terms of the text, since the book of Revelation was written during the Roman Empire, it seems to set the present tense of the text during the reign of the 6th emperor of the Roman Empire. Let's take a look at the names and reign periods of the emperors of the Roman Empire. The first emperor, Augustus, reigned from 27 BC to AD 14. Tiberius, from AD 14 to 37. Caligula, from 37 to 41. Claudius, from 41 to 54. Nero, from 54 to 68. Galba, from 68 to 69. Otho, in 69. Vitellius, in 69. Vespasian, from 69 to 79. Titus, from 79 to 81. Domitian, from 81 to 96. Here, we will examine the period from the first Emperor Augustus to Emperor Domitian. The phrase, 5 have fallen, indicates that the reign of the 5th emperor, Nero, has already passed. The 6th emperor is Galba. In fact, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius all claimed the title of emperor during the chaotic period following Nero's death, but since they did not hold stable imperial authority, They are sometimes excluded from the list of emperors. One reason for this is that it is assumed that the time when John, who recorded the book of Revelation, was exiled to the island of Patmos corresponds to the reign of Emperor Domitian. This is because Emperor Domitian persecuted Christians. And some interpret this Domitian as the eighth king mentioned in Revelation chapter 17:11. Then the sixth king would be Vespasian. This Vespasian was a general dispatched to suppress the first Jewish revolt, reigning from 66 to 70 AD. And during a time of turmoil in the empire, he returned to Rome after assigning the task of capturing Jerusalem to his son Titus and became emperor. The important thing is that when interpreting the Old Testament prophecies, God used Babylon as a rod to punish Jerusalem. And then, as a punishment for his people, God would destroy Babylon. Here, if we see the Roman Empire that destroyed Jerusalem as Babylon, it is believed that shortly after the fall of Jerusalem, the Roman Empire would also fall, fulfilling the prophecies recorded in the Bible. Therefore, both Vespasian, who was responsible for the fall of Jerusalem, and his son Titus, became emperors of the Roman Empire. And this period can be considered a precursor to the fall of the Roman Empire. However, the Roman Empire did not fall at that time. If it is said that the eighth king will destroy Jerusalem, it could refer to Vespasian, who was the emperor at the time of Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD. However, the text states that the empire will fall during the time of the eighth king. Yet, since the Roman Empire did not fall after that, this beast is not the Roman Empire. After that, the Roman Empire became a Christian nation. The Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, after the split between East and West, was also a Christian nation, since the time it separated from the Western Roman Empire. And its history continued for 1,000 years. Therefore, there are no similarities to the beast described in the book of Revelation. If the book of Revelation describes events that will inevitably occur in history, we must look for a history that matches the depiction in the text elsewhere. Since the book of Revelation was written, it has been a constant source of controversy in the church, due to interpretation issues and many groups that have been declared heretical. In the Korean church, are mostly denominations that interpret the book of Revelation. There are many commentaries and interpretations of the book of Revelation, but there are not many practical examples that can be shown as its fulfillment in world history. However, the figure with the number 666 has been defined as the Antichrist, who terrifies the world and persecutes God's people, with various interpretations about who he might be. Many examples have been presented, from the most frequently mentioned, Emperor Nero, to Hitler of Germany, who instigated World War II, but the identity of the beast with 7 heads has not been discovered. Thus, some interpretations have presented the book of Revelation not as a history of the future, but merely as a document reflecting the reality faced by Christians at the time it was written. In this book, we aim to identify the countries corresponding to the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and the beast with 2 horns, like a lamb, throughout the history of the past 2,000 years. In the Bible History School, starting from the next session, we will examine Gog and Magog, as well as the Soviet Union, in order to approach the reality of the beast with 7 heads. We appreciate your continued interest and subscriptions. Thank you. Hello, this is the Bible History School. This is the 4th session on the book of Revelation and world history. In the last session, we explored the book of Revelation and world history. Chapter 1, the identity of the beast with 7 heads, specifically. Section 1, the symbolic terms of the Book of Revelation, and their historical reality. In this session, we will look into how Gog and Magog, as well as modern-day Russia following the Soviet Union, are closely connected to the prophecies of the Bible. Starting from their origins, let's take a look together, slowly. First, let's look at the text of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, chapter 38, Gog invades Israel. 1. The Lord said. 2. Ezekiel, son of man, condemn Gog, that wicked ruler of the kingdoms of Meshech and Tubal in the land of Magog. Tell him. 3. I, the Lord God, am your enemy. 4. And I will make you powerless. I will put a hook in your jaw and drag away both you and your large army. You command cavalry troops that wear heavy armor and carry shields and swords. 5. Your army includes soldiers from Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya. 6. As well as from Gomer and Beth Togarmah in the north. Your army is enormous. 7. So keep your troops prepared to fight. 8. Because in a few years, I will command you to invade Israel, a country that was ruined by war. It was deserted for a long time, but its people have returned from the foreign nations where they once lived. The Israelites now live in peace in the mountains of their own land. 9. But you and your army will attack them like a fierce thunderstorm and surround them like a cloud. 10. When that day comes, I know that you will have an evil plan. 11. To take advantage of Israel, that weak and peaceful country, where people live safely inside towns that have no walls or gates or locks. 12. You will rob the people in towns that were once a pile of rubble. These people lived as prisoners in foreign nations, but they have returned to Israel, the most important place in the world, and they own livestock and property. 13. The people of Sheba and Dedan, along with merchants from villages in southern Spain, will be your allies. They will want some of the silver and gold, as well as the livestock and property that your army takes from Israel. 14. I, the Lord God, know that when you see my people Israel living in peace. 15. You will lead your powerful cavalry from your kingdom in the north. 16. You will attack my people like a storm cloud that covers their land. I will let you invade my country, Israel, so that every nation on earth will know that I, the Lord, am holy. 17. The Lord said to Gog, long ago, I had my prophets warn the people of Israel that someday I would send an enemy to attack them. You, Gog, are that enemy, and that day is coming. Schofield, who is known as a representative generationism theologian, claims in his annotated Bible that Gog and Magog, in Ezekiel chapter 38, are northern forces led by Russia. Here, Magog is the name of a land or a country, and Gog is the title of the king of that country. In the expression Gog, the king of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, in Ezekiel 382, Rosh is compared to Russia, and Meshech is compared to Moscow. He also compared Tubal to Tobolsk, the capital of the Tatar state of Sibir, founded in the 16th century. This conclusion was made because their pronunciations are similar. In addition, this war by Gog and Magog is also mentioned in Revelation chapter 20, 7-10. He interprets that if the northern forces led by Russia come to attack Jerusalem, the war will be the War of Armageddon, mentioned in Revelation chapter 16:16. Everett Carver refutes this interpretation, saying, the similarity in the spelling of the words is not a basis for equating the two words. Nevertheless, many other scholars have interpreted that the red beast of the north that will attack Israel in the last days will be the Soviet Union. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we no longer see such interpretations. This may be because, although the Soviet Union was a threat during the Cold War, it was no longer an empire after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so it was concluded that such a thing would no longer happen. However, in this article, I will re-examine the history of the Soviet Union, explore the secrets of the beast, and see how history progresses. Section 3. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Soviet Union, which was established in December 1922, and boasted of its power as a communist powerhouse, declared the dissolution of the Union in December 1991 and disappeared into the back alleys of history. After World War II, Eastern Europe and North Korea became communist. After that, Vietnam became communist following China. And many countries around the world were worried that they would be communized by the Soviet Union. As the Cold War continued, many countries were concerned that the Soviet Union's expansion policy would be revived when the invasion of Afghanistan began in 1979. However, following the collapse of the Berlin Wall in Germany on November 9, 1989, the domino collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe began. And in December 1991, the Soviet Union, which was the leading power among communist countries, was dissolved. And the Red Empire of Terror gradually disappeared from people's memories. The results of this history have also brought about changes. In the interpretation of the Book of Revelation, the voices of those who shouted that the Red Beast, coming from the north, would be the Soviet Union have become quieter. And the books of scholars who say, such history will no longer happen, have filled the bookstores. Furthermore, the voices of the Nostradamusists, who claimed that the end of humanity might come in July 1999, seem to have become quieter as the 21st century approaches. It is just like the claim of the Dami Mission Church, which claimed the rapture on October 28, 1992. When nothing happened on that very day, their loudspeaker sound stopped, and as time passed, even the fact that such an event occurred disappeared from people's memories and interest. Until October 1992, when the Dami Mission Church had suggested, all Korean churches were interested and nervous about what would happen, but when nothing happened, they treated it as a surprise commotion at the end of the century. And it was forgotten by church members. And even studying the Book of Revelation in church became indifferent. Now, let's take a closer look at the Soviet Union, which has become a fossil of 20th century history. Next time, let's take a closer look at the identity of the seven-headed beast. Section 4, the seven-headed beast. Section 5, the duration of Babylon. Section 6, the Soviet Union and Russia. Section 7, the establishment and dissolution of the Soviet Union, etc. We will learn about this. Thank you for your interest and subscription. This was the Bible History School. See you next time. Thank you very much. Hello. This is the Bible History School. Last time, we learned that Gog and Magog is closely related to Babylon in the prophecy. We will discuss the identity of Gog and Magog in more detail in Chapter 6 of the Revelation and World History series. This time, we will look a little closer at the identity of the seven-headed beast. Section 4. The seven-headed beast. The Goryeo dynasty of Korea was ruled by 33 kings. From the first king, Taezo, to the 33rd king, Changwon, from 918 to 1392. The Joseon dynasty, which followed the Goryeo dynasty, had a total of 27 kings, from King Gojong, who was the king at the time of the Japan-Korea annexation in 1910, to King Sunzong, who ascended the throne after him. In this way, the number of kings of a country is the sum of the number of kings. From the founding of the country to its destruction, this beast nation that appears in the Book of Revelation states that the number of its kings is 7. No empire in history has had a total of 7 emperors. However, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when we looked into it, we found that the number of the highest leaders of the Soviet Union was coincidentally 7. The list is as follows: Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, Gorbachev. These 7 people, from Lenin to Gorbachev, are sometimes called the Kremlin leaders. However, even if the number of people who reigned as the highest powers of the Soviet Union is 7, we cannot hastily conclude that the 7-headed beast mentioned in the Book of Revelation is the Soviet Union, only when the descriptions of this beast nation, Babylon, and its characteristics throughout the prophecy are consistent. Can we say, that nation is this nation? Verse 5. The duration of Babylon. There is no mention of the duration of Babylon's rule in the Book of Revelation. However, there is a passage in Jeremiah 25 that foretells that Israel and many nations will be ruled by Babylon for 70 years. Let's look at Jeremiah 25:9. And now I will let you be attacked by nations from the north, and especially by my servant, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia. You and other nearby nations will be destroyed and left in ruins forever. Everyone who sees what has happened will be shocked, but they will still make fun of you. 10. I will put an end to your parties and wedding celebrations. No one will grind grain or be here to light the lamps at night. 11. This country will be as empty as a desert, because I will make all of you the slaves of the king of Babylonia for 70 years. 12. When that time is up, I will punish the king of Babylonia and his people for everything they have done wrong, and I will turn that country into a wasteland forever. 13. My servant Jeremiah has told you what I said I will do to Babylonia and to the other nations. And he wrote it all down in this book. I will do everything I threatened. Jeremiah 25:9-13. This is interpreted as referring to the fact that the kingdom of Judah would be liberated from captivity 70 years after being taken captive by the Babylonian Empire. The book of Daniel also confirms this by mentioning the name of the prophet Jeremiah. The same number of years also appears in Daniel 9:1-2. Some years later, Darius the Mede, who was the son of Xerxes, had become king of Babylonia. And during his first year as king, I found out from studying the writings of the prophets that the Lord had said to Jeremiah, Jerusalem will lie in ruins for 70 years. Daniel 9:1-2. However, there is a part in the Gospel where Jesus quotes the book of Daniel again, which is called the Apocalypse of the Gospel. Let's look at Matthew chapter 24:15. Someday you will see that horrible thing in the holy place. Just as the prophet Daniel said. Everyone who reads this must try to understand. 16. If you are living in Judea at that time, run to the mountains. 17. If you are on the roof of your house, don't go inside to get anything. 18. If you are out in the field, don't go back for your coat. 19. It will be a terrible time for women who are expecting babies or nursing young children. 20. And pray that you won't have to escape in winter or on a Sabbath. 21. This will be the worst time of suffering since the beginning of the world, and nothing this terrible will ever happen again. 22. If God doesn't make the time shorter, no one will be left alive. But because of God's chosen ones, He will make the time shorter. Matthew chapter 24:15-22. This part tells us that the historical events prophesied in the book of Daniel did not occur during the ministry of Jesus Christ, but are events that will occur in the future. The book of Revelation also clearly states in its introduction that it is the revelation of Jesus Christ. The Bible is inextricably linked to the book of Jeremiah and the book of Daniel, the book of Daniel and the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus Christ and the book of Revelation. All prophecies come from one God, and the fulfillment is also accomplished by the same God. Babylon in the Old Testament and Babylon in the book of Revelation may refer to the same object. In order to do so, when the image is drawn in, the two blueprints are assembled in actual history and match, it is revealed as fact. Let's find out if there was an empire that ruled the world for 70 years. And then fell 70 years later. Section 6. Soviet Union and Russia. We are now looking at the Soviet Union. From the establishment of the Soviet Union to its dissolution, there were 7 supreme rulers. If Babylon in the book of Revelation and Babylon in the book of Jeremiah were the same empire, then the Soviet Union should have lasted 70 years. The Bolshevik Revolution occurred in Russia and the Communist Soviet regime was established in 1917. The Soviet Union was dissolved in December 1991. If converted to a period, it is 74 years. Although the period is somewhat similar, it does not exactly match 70 years. If the life of the prophecy lies in accuracy, then this can be considered a rather large error. However, there is one thing that has been overlooked here. That is the fact that Russia and the Soviet Union are not the same entity. At first glance, the Communist Revolution occurred in Russia, and the revolutionary forces sat on the throne of the Soviet Union. So they seem to be the same entity. However, if we look more closely, the two are remarkably different. Russia was only a republic that was a member of the Soviet Union. After the formation of the Soviet Union, although the Russian Republic was the largest republic within the Soviet Union, Russia was not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a federation formed by the union of several republics. Russia is a single state. Unlike Russia, the Soviet Union is a federation of several states or republics. That is, a federation. We need to look a little more closely at the reality of the Soviet Union. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17, 9-13 again. 9. Anyone with wisdom can figure this out. The 7 heads that the woman is sitting on stand for 7 hills. These heads are also 7 kings. 10. 5 of the kings are dead. One is ruling now, and the other one has not yet come. But when he does, he will rule for only a little while. 11. You also saw a beast that used to be and no longer is. That beast is one of the 7 kings who will return as the 8th king, but only to be destroyed. 12. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 more kings, who have not yet come into power. And they will rule with the beast for only a short time. 13. They all think alike and will give their power and authority to the beast. As we can see in this text, there is another 8th king. However, this 8th king is mentioned as one of the 7 heads. And in verse 12, there are 10 other kings. Other than the 7-headed beast, 10 horns appear. If you do not know the reality of history, and only look at the text, you will wander in confusion. Next time, we will look at how this 8th king is related to the 7-headed beast in actual history. Please show much interest and subscribe. This was the Bible History School. Thank you very much. Hello. This is the Bible History School. This is the 6th hour of Revelation and world history. Last time, we learned that the number of the highest power holders during the existence of the Soviet Union was 7. So we tried to figure out if these 7 Soviet power holders were the 7-headed beast mentioned in the book of Revelation. To confirm this time we will delve a little deeper into the reality of the Soviet Union. Chapter 1, Section 7. The establishment and dissolution of the Soviet Union. The October Revolution of 1917 in Russia succeeded and the Russian-Soviet regime was established. However, it did not immediately become the Soviet Union. In 1922, the head of the Central Committee was Lenin. On April 2, 1922, Stalin was appointed as the party's general secretary, but less than 2 months later, On May 26, Lenin suffered a stroke. When Lenin could not attend the Central Committee or the Kremlin, the Secretariat's agents took the lead in establishing policies for the entire country. And the final decision-making authority was held by the General Secretary, Stalin. The Soviet Union was established in December 1922, when the Transcaucasian Republic Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia and the four republics of Russia, Ukraine, and Byelorussia joined together to form the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Soviet Union, in some cases, such as the cases of Ukraine and Byelorussia, unification occurred through gradual and peaceful means, while in others, such as Georgia under the Menshevik rule, unification occurred through invasion by the Red Army. As a result of this invasion, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan were united to form the Transcaucasian Soviet Socialist Federal Republic. On this basis, the 10th All-Russian Congress of Soviets held in December 1922 concluded a federation treaty between the four Soviet Socialist Republics, establishing the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. After that, if you add the additional republics that joined after World War II, the Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics in total: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The year the Soviet Union was established was 1922, and the year it was dissolved was 1991. So it has been exactly 70 years if you calculate it by years. Readers will already see something at this point. The number of the most powerful people in the Soviet Union is 7. The seven-headed beast. The 70-year lifespan of the Soviet Union, the 70-year reign of Babylon. This is why I have focused on the true nature of the Soviet Union. While interpreting the Book of Revelation, this is only the beginning of knowing the true nature of something. To know the main body, you have to fit all the remaining pieces of the puzzle together. Let's go into it and take a closer look to see if this Soviet Union is indeed the seven-headed beast that appears in the Book of Revelation. Chapter 1, Section 8. 5 have fallen, 1 is. Let us look at the words of Revelation chapter 17:9. Here is a wise thought. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain a little while. The beast that was and is not is the 8th king, who is of the 7, and he goes into destruction. Revelation chapter 17:9-11. The present tense of 5 have fallen, 1 is, refers to the period when the 6th ruler is in power. Therefore, all scholars who interpret the Book of Revelation have recognized this verse as the period when the Book of Revelation was written while the 6th ruler was alive. However, if we understand the text carefully, we can see that the present tense here is the present tense of the entire prophecy. That is, the entire story of the Book of Revelation. In other words, we can see that the period of the 6th king's reign among the 7 rulers of this beast nation is the present tense of the entire text of the prophecy. This fact is also a task that must be verified in the process of interpreting the text. 5 have fallen. The era of the 5 rulers, Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and Andropov, is over. 1 exists. The current period is when Chernenko is ruling. The other has not yet arrived. But when he does, he will certainly continue for a short time. The 7th ruler is Gorbachev, and his power will not last long. Here, the 6th ruler, Chernenko, is not a very important person. In fact, his reign was the shortest. However, the reason the 6th in the text of the prophecy is the present tense is to emphasize the description of the final ruler, who will bring about the fall of the empire. Using the present tense as the time before the seventh ruler, the last person, ascends to the throne. We must now solve a crucial problem. We must find out who the eighth king is, who is among the seven heads. Chapter 1, Section 9. The Eighth King. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17:11 again. The beast that was, and is not, is the eighth king, and is of the seven. And he goes into destruction. Revelation chapter 17:11. The beast from the sea has only 7 heads. However, here, another king, the eighth king, appears. Does that mean that there are 8 people with the highest authority in the empire? If that's the case, the number of the highest rulers of the Soviet Union is 7. Which does not match the exact appearance of the beast. According to the text of Revelation, there is an 8th king. But including this 8th king, the beast has 7 heads. However, this 8th king is said to be one of the 7. The supreme rulers of the Soviet Union all succeeded to power when their predecessors died. The only one who can become the 8th king among the 7 is the 7th king. In other words, the 7th king, Gorbachev, will become the 8th king again. Here is the secret. In the part where it says, was, but is not, the part where it says, now is the time. It is the same as the part where it says 5 are gone, 1 is. In other words, the present tense, used in the same paragraph is when the 6th king is ruling. Was, but is not, refers to the political attributes that the supreme ruler possesses, depending on whether the power structure of a country is a monarchy, a presidential system, or a cabinet system. The supreme ruler is determined. The political and official title of the person in power in the beast kingdom that appears in the book of Revelation is very different from before and after. For example, after Chairman Kim Il-sung died in North Korea, Kim Jong-il inherited the power, but the official title that Kim Jong-il holds is only Chairman of the National Defense Commission, although there is a separate formal head of state under the Constitution. It is a well-known fact that Kim Jong-il is the actual person with the highest power. In the Soviet Union, the highest power holder has been the Secretary General of the party since Stalin. In 1922, when Stalin was appointed Secretary General of the party, the actual person with the highest power was Lenin, who served as chairman of the Supreme Council. However, after Lenin collapsed from a stroke, Stalin exercised the actual power, and from then on, the Secretary General of the party became the actual person with the highest power in the Soviet Union. In terms of the Soviet power structure, the highest state organ of the Soviet Union is the Supreme Soviet, or Supreme Council, which consists of the 2 chambers of the Soviet Union and the Soviet of Nationalities. The Supreme Council elects the Presidium at a joint meeting of both chambers, and its chairman is considered the head of state of the Soviet Union. During the period when the Supreme Council was not in session, the Presidium exercised its power. The Supreme Council organized the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union at a joint meeting of both chambers, and its chairman was the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. In theory, the highest decision-making body of the Communist Party is the Party Congress. But this is only held once every 5 years for about 10 days. The Central Committee, which is elected at the Party Congress, directs all activities during the period when the Party Congress is not in session, and elects the Politburo, Secretariat, and Secretary General of the Central Committee. Therefore, in reality, this Central Committee can be said to be the highest organ of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and its core is the Politburo and Secretariat, and the Secretary General is the one who leads them. Therefore, in the Soviet Union, the Secretary General of the Communist Party was more important than the nominal head of state, the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Council, or the chairman of the Council of Ministers, who was the equivalent of the Prime Minister. Now, the question is, who is the eighth king? The most highlighted part of Chapter 1 of Revelation and World History. He is the person who leads the Red Empire to destruction. The eighth king is Gorbachev himself, the seventh king. The other has not yet come. But when he does, he will certainly remain for a short while. This means that when the first king ascends to the throne, he will certainly maintain the previous form of power for a short while. Gorbachev also rose to the position of the highest authority in the Soviet Union. As the Secretary General of the party, the eighth king is not the king as the Secretary General. Who was the king up to the seventh? In March 1985, Gorbachev was elected as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and in May 1989, he was elected as the President of the Union by establishing the presidential system. Here is the secret. What does it mean that the seventh king will continue for a while? Gorbachev briefly maintained his position as the highest authority in the Soviet Union, as the General Secretary of the party, and then transitioned to a de facto one-man ruling system, called the presidential system, and ascended to the position of the President of the Union. He ascended to the position of another king, with a different power structure than the previous 6 kings. Gorbachev ascended to the highest position of political power, as the President of the Union, not as the 7th king's title of General Secretary of the Communist Party. There was, but now there is no more, refers to a ruling system in which a single head of state, like a king or president, runs the government. Here, the point is when the present tense of now is. Since the time when the 6th king is ruling in the text, 5 have fallen and 1 remains. Should be considered the present tense of the entire text of the prophecy. Up until the 6th king, Chernenko, he acted as the party secretary and the highest authority in the country. In terms of the law and power structure, the power system by a single commander-in-chief like a king or president is explained as, not now. The party secretary became the highest authority in the Soviet Union, after Stalin became the first party secretary and formed the Soviet Union in 1922. There were single-person powers like kings before the Soviet Union. The Tsar was that. While the beast state, the Soviet Union, was in power, that is, until the 6th ruler. The one-man ruling system like the king disappeared, but it was revived when Gorbachev, the 8th ruler of the Soviet Union, became the head of state as the President of the Union. He will go into destruction. This means that this beast kingdom will be destroyed, while the 8th king is in power, and in fact, the Soviet Union was destroyed during the term of the 8th king, the President, Gorbachev. In March 1990, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the 3 Baltic countries declared independence. Gorbachev, who was concerned about the dissolution of the Soviet Union, came up with a new plan, the Union of Sovereign States, which was different from the existing Soviet federal system, to resolve this crisis. Thus, Gorbachev proposed a compromise plan called the New Federation Treaty. On November 15, 1990, this was a form in which the authority of the existing Soviet Union government was largely transferred to each republic, so that each republic would have more political sovereignty than before, and the Soviet Union would actually have only the role of an economic integration body, and the authority to handle defense and foreign affairs. Due to these political actions of Gorbachev, a coup d'état took place on August 19, 1991, led by hardline conservatives who were concerned that these measures would actually bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, due to the leadership of Yeltsin, who became the directly elected president of the Russian Federation, and strong opposition from Western countries, the coup ended in 3 days. After that, Gorbachev resigned as General Secretary of the Communist Party and declared the dissolution of the Communist Party. but he was unable to rebuild the empire that had already begun to collapse. Finally, on December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as president of the Soviet Union and declared the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Coincidentally, this day was the day that Western churches celebrated as Christmas. For reference, Christmas celebrated by the Russian Orthodox Church is on January 7. During the Cold War, the Red Beast, called the Soviet Union that had made many countries tremble in fear of communization, disappeared into history. Although it was expressed as the eighth king, it was already said that the beast had 7 heads when describing its appearance. In other words, we can see that there were only 7 people. The 8th king is the one who belongs to the 7, that is, the 7th king, Gorbachev himself. And the expression 8th king refers to the legal form of power, which is the attribute of the powerful. We are finally peeling off the secret shell of this 7-headed beast, one by one. In order for the interpretation of the identity of the 7-headed beast revealed this time to be correct, there is one more task left. That is, it will be certain only after the identity of the 10 horns that appear in Revelation chapter 17:16 is revealed and compared. Next time, let's dive into the abyss of the prophecy to find out about who do these 10 horns refer to. This was Bible History School. Thank you very much. Hello. This is the Bible History School. This is the 7th session of Revelation and World History. Last time, we looked at the history that most closely resembles the explanation of the 7-headed beast that appears in the Revelation. It was the history of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was established in December 1922 under Stalin's leadership. On December 25, 1991, it disappeared into the back alleys of history. When Soviet President Gorbachev declared the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it lasted exactly 70 years. During that 70-year period, the number of people with the highest power who ruled the Soviet Union was 7. It was exactly the same as the contents of the prophecy that mentioned the 7-headed beast. This alone is a very surprising fact, but there is still one more task left for this content to become the correct answer for the fulfillment of the prophecy. It will become more certain when the identity of the 10 horns that appear with the 7-headed beast is revealed. This time, we will look for a clue to the identity of the 10 horns. Chapter 1, Section 10. 10 horns. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17, verse 16 again. The 10 horns that you saw, and the beast hated the prostitute and destroyed her. It says that the 10 horns destroyed the beast nation. The text also explains that these 10 horns are 10 kings. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who will receive authority as kings for a time with the beast. They have one mind and give their power and authority to the beast. Revelation chapter 17, verses 12 to 13. When we say 10 kings, we can mean 10 kings who arise in one country. In other words, they are the ones who succeed to the throne of one country. However, when 10 people exist at the same time, it means that 10 countries exist. For example, the 10 horns that arise from the 4th beast in the book of Daniel could mean 10 kings who ascend to the throne sequentially in the 4th country. The book of Revelation and the book of Daniel use similar symbolic terms, but their meanings are slightly different. It is necessary to understand the context accurately by comparing the texts. Let's look at the words of Daniel chapter 7. Thus says the one who was present, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth. Trample it down and crush it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will arise from that kingdom. After them another will arise, who will be different from the first ones, and will subdue 3 kings. Daniel 7:23-24. The 10 horns that appear in the book of Daniel mean 10 kings who ascend to the throne sequentially in one country. Unlike the book of Daniel, the 10 horns in the book of Revelation represent 10 kingdoms. This can be seen in the phrase has not yet received a kingdom. The time point of not yet here is the same as the time point mentioned earlier, when it says 5 have fallen and 1 is. That is, the time point when the 6th king is ruling. This is a very important point, that the time point should be applied equally in all explanations of the beast nation. The phrase has not yet received a kingdom until the 6th king has ruled shows that these 10 horns will only receive a kingdom after the beast is destroyed. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, each of the republics that comprised the Soviet Union gained independence. However, the total number of republics that comprised the Soviet Union is 15. Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. There are 15 of them. The Soviet Union was formed by these 15 republics. So in the text, the 10 horns gain a country should mean 10 republics gain new countries. But the number of republics was 15. If so, the prophecy in the text does not match the actual history. So it can be said that it is not an exact fulfillment of the prophecy. However, if we look a little closer at history, we can find the secret key. In March 1990, the 3 Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared independence. The 3 Baltic states had gathered on August 23, 1989. The 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which handed over rights to the region to the Soviet Union, to show the world their desire for independence. They held the Baltic Way protest, a human chain of 600 kilometers, the longest in history. In August 1991, after the failure of the 3-day Soviet coup, the independence of the 3 Baltic states became a fait accompli, and countries around the world recognized it one after another. On September 2, the Soviet authorities finally recognized the independence of the 3 Baltic states, making them independent states. These 3 states also passed the UN membership application at the 46th UN General Assembly, held on September 17, 1991, and became UN members. In other words, these 3 nations were not present when the dissolution of the Soviet Union was declared, even if these 3 countries are subtracted from the number of the 10 horns. The number of the remaining republics is 12. So the numbers do not match the 10 horns. So are the numbers presented in the text just symbolic numbers that do not match exactly? No. The Commonwealth of Independent States was created when the Soviet Union collapsed. However, the Republic of Georgia did not participate when the CIS was launched. Even so, the number of countries participating in the Commonwealth of Independent States is still 11. And it is one number different from the 10 horns. The secret is right here. Yet to obtain a country. The expression yet to obtain a country means that they will obtain a new country after the destruction of the beast nation. That is, they will become newly independent countries. In fact, all of these countries have a history filled with numerous invasions by foreign powers and rule by empires. For example, in the case of the Turkmen region, it was conquered by Persia in the 6th to 4th centuries BC, by Arabs in the 7th to 8th centuries, and by the Mongols in the 13th century. In the 16th century, it became part of the Khiva and Bukhara Khanates. And some were ruled by Iranians. The Turkmen people spoke a Turkic language and lived a nomadic life. And in the late 19th century, they were conquered by Russia. When Russia advanced into Turkmenia and were incorporated into the Soviet Union, they finally acquired the status of an independent nation when they joined the Commonwealth of Independent States. Due to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In the case of Ukraine, Ukraine served as a passageway for various ethnic groups, from ancient times to the Middle Ages, and was ruled by the Scythians, Sarmatians, Goths, Huns, and Avars. In the 8th to 7th centuries BC, through the Greek colonies established on the northern coast of the Black Sea, it was influenced by Mediterranean civilization. The Russian Khanate was established following the Bosphorus Kingdom, that lasted from the 4th century BC to the 4th century AD. This Russian Khanate achieved the first political unification of East Slavs during the Kievan era. In the 10th to 12th centuries, however, after the Kievan Rus collapsed due to the Mongol conquest in the 13th century, the Gallic Volhynia Principality was established, and lasted from the 13th to the 14th century. After that, Gallic was annexed by Poland and Volhynia by Lithuania. And in 1569, Ukraine came under Polish rule. Ukrainians formed the Ukrainian Kazakh group centered around peasants, who had fled from Poland and Lithuania and resisted Poland. In 1648, they started a war of independence, but the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which intervened in this war, agreed to the division of Poland and Ukraine. And in 1667, the right bank of the Dnieper River became Polish territory, and the left bank became Russian territory. After that, an autonomous Kazakh state, called Hetmanshina, was established in Russian Ukraine. In the early 18th century, the Hetman attempted independence, but was defeated by Peter the Great. And after being attacked by Catherine II, the Hetman state system was completely abolished in 1783. After that, Russia named this place Little Russia. After that, it pursued a strong Russification policy, such as introducing the serfdom system. Polish Ukraine became Russian territory, except for Gallic, due to the partition of Poland in the late 18th century. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Russian Ukraine temporarily became independent, but soon became Sovietized after a fierce civil war, and Ukraine formed the former Soviet Union. Together with the three republics of Russia, Belarus, and Transcaucasia in late 1922. Refer to Pascal World Encyclopedia, Dongsio Cultural Publishing, 1996. Turkmenistan, Ukraine section. In this way, the countries that existed as republics of the Soviet Union, and then joined the Commonwealth of Independent States, did not properly have the appearance of independent states until just before they were incorporated into the Soviet Union. It was only after the dissolution of the Soviet Union that they finally had the appearance of independent states. However, one of the 11 countries that declared the Commonwealth of Independent States after the dissolution of the Soviet Union must be excluded from the 10 horns. That is, Russia. Russia was an independent country before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And since it was also an empire, it is not a newly acquired country, that is, a newly independent country. The text of the Book of Revelation states as follows: while the beast lives, it has not yet acquired a country. But when the beast dies, the 10 horns will acquire a new country. These 10 countries are precisely the newly acquired independent countries. Since Russia is not a newly independent state, it should be excluded from the number of the 10 horns. The countries that have newly gained a country among the countries that participated in the Commonwealth of Independent States, excluding Russia, are all 10 countries, which exactly matches the number of the 10 horns. When the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS was launched on January 1, 1992, Georgia, out of the 12 republics excluding the 3 Baltic states, withdrew due to internal affairs, and only 11 republics were launched. After that, Georgia joined the CIS in 1993, but declared its withdrawal again after the war with Russia in 2008. In addition, Turkmenistan withdrew in August 2005 and is participating as an associate member. So the total number of full members of the Commonwealth of Independent States as of 2009 is 10. To explain this situation again, after the Soviet Union was dissolved, the Baltic states were already excluded, leaving 12 republics. But since Georgia did not join the Commonwealth of Independent States, 11 countries came together to form the Commonwealth of Independent States. Among them, Russia was not a newly independent state, but had been an independent state for a long time, but was temporarily under the control of the Soviet Union. Therefore, after the destruction of the Soviet Union, the beast state, the number of newly acquired countries, that is, the number of newly independent states, was 10. They had one purpose and gave their power and authority to the beast. Revelation chapter 17, verse 13. The 10 horns that you saw and the beast will hate the prostitute, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. The Soviet Union is a union of these republics, and the supreme power of the Soviet Union was commanding all of these republics. Since the Soviets of each republic united to form a federal state, it is said that they gave their power and authority to the beast. In reality, the weak were forcibly merged by the strong. However, in terms of form, these countries united to form a strong country. That is, a federal state with strong power. The 10 horns, that is, the 10 republics, gave authority to the Soviet Union, the beast nation, and the supreme power of the Soviet Union. As a result of this Red Empire that was created in this way, the world trembled in fear of communism. The 10 horns destroyed the beast refers to the situation in which the Soviet Union automatically disappeared when these republics declared that they would become independent countries from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was able to survive by securing finances through contributions from each republic, and using that to pay the salaries of federal civil servants and soldiers. When each republic declared that they would no longer pay their mandatory contributions to the Federation, and would become independent from the Soviet Union, forming a commonwealth of independent states that had nothing to do with the Soviet Union, the salaries of federal civil servants could no longer be paid, since the soldiers were also automatically incorporated into the armies of their respective republics. The Soviet Union lost the physical power to prevent the independence of the republics, and eventually naturally collapsed. Many scholars have pointed to the European Union as the 10 horns, but this is due to a misreading of the text. The EU is an economic union formed by already independent countries. However, the 10 horns in the book of Revelation refer to new independent countries that will emerge after the beast is destroyed. It is not a phenomenon in which several countries come together to form one country, but a description of a new country that is created when an empire collapses. The 10 horns that appear in the book of Revelation are the opposite of the situation that unfolds in the European Union, where several countries come together to form one economic community. It refers to the phenomenon in which several republics came together to form a federal state, called the Soviet Union. And when these republics declared independence, the Soviet Union collapsed. That is, the Soviet Union, a beast state, was dismantled and these countries acquired the status of independent states. In order to accurately understand and interpret the book of prophecy, we must first begin with an accurate reading of the text. The reason why we must also read the book of Daniel in order to interpret the book of Revelation is because the 10 horns appear in both documents. But the descriptions of these 10 horns are different in each. It is most important to have a correct understanding of the text and to carefully examine the actual history that occurred. According to what we have seen so far, the 7 heads of the beast are the number of the highest powers of the Soviet Union: Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. All 7. The reign of Babylon was said to be 70 years. The Soviet Union also lasted exactly 70 years, from its establishment in 1922 until its dissolution in 1991. The 10 horns that destroyed the beast refer to the fact that 11 republics, including Russia, declared independence from the Soviet Union and formed the Commonwealth of Independent States. As a result, the Soviet Union collapsed, became new independent states. Last time, we revealed that the most important entity in the Book of Revelation, the 7-headed beast, is the Soviet Union. And this time, we learned about the identity of the 10 horns that appear with the 7-headed beast. We found a history that exactly matches the description of the existence of the beast described in the Book of Revelation and the text of the prophecy. 7 powerful men led the Soviet Union for 70 years. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, 10 new countries became independent. It is the Commonwealth of Independent States. This is not a history that was forcibly put together. It is not a collection of events from various eras. It is simply amazing how an empire that exactly matches the description in the prophecy existed in one country in the 20th century. This is not the entire interpretation. This is only the beginning. There are many issues that remain to be verified. We will move forward together, step by step. Please, show much interest and subscribe. This was the Bible History School. Thank you very much for reading to the end. Hello. This is the Bible History School. This is the 8th session of Revelation and World History. Last time, we learned about the true nature of the 7-headed beast and 10 horns that appear in the Revelation. It was the history of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was established in December 1922 under Stalin's leadership. On December 25, 1991, it disappeared into the back alleys of history. When Soviet President Gorbachev declared the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it lasted exactly 70 years. During that 70-year period, the number of supreme power holders who ruled the Soviet Union was 7 people: Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. The Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics. Among them, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The 3 Baltic states had already become independent and joined the UN before the declaration of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was dissolved, 12 republics remained. Among them, Georgia did not join the Commonwealth of Independent States due to the Civil War. On December 8, 1991, when the Commonwealth of Independent States was founded, the 3 member states were Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Then, on December 21, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan joined, forming the Commonwealth of Independent States, excluding Georgia. Finally, on December 25, 1991, Gorbachev, then president of the Soviet Union, declared the official dissolution of the Soviet Union. Among the countries that gained independence from the Soviet Union, 10 countries, excluding Russia, were newly independent countries. When the republics including these 10 countries gathered together and gave strength to the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union had the appearance of a superpower. This is consistent with the situation in Revelation, chapter 17, section 13. They had one mind and gave their power and authority to the beast. And when these republics declared independence, the monster called the Soviet Union, that suddenly appeared in human history, in the 20th century suddenly disappeared. This situation is exactly consistent with the Bible's verse, that these 10 horns destroyed the beast nation of Babylon. We have found a history that is exactly consistent with the contents of the prophecy that mentions the 7-headed beast and the 10 horns. This is an amazing fact in itself, but we do not stop here. In the text of the Bible, the name of the beast nation, named Babylon, is expressed in various ways. It describes the nature of the empire. We will substitute each of these names into the Soviet Union, and verify whether the Soviet Union is indeed the beast mentioned in the prophecy. In this time, among them, we will look at the name, the one who died and came back to life. Chapter 1, Section 11. The one who died and resurrected. Let's look at the words of Revelation chapter 13, again. One of his heads seemed to have been wounded to death. But his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. Died and resurrected means that he miraculously survived from a state where he was almost dead, due to a fatal wound. It is different from the expression, completely medically dead and then came back to life. In terms of a politician, it can be seen as his life as a politician, almost ending, but after many twists and turns, he miraculously recovered. In the case of former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung, he was kidnapped and almost died, but he barely managed to return alive thanks to the rescue efforts of many people. 1973. And in fact, in the early 1980s, he was arrested by the new military regime on charges of conspiracy to commit sedition for orchestrating the May 18 Gwangju democratization movement behind the scenes, and was indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit sedition. He was sentenced to death by the Army Martial Law Department's Ordinary Court-Martial on September 17. And the Supreme Court confirmed the death sentence on January 23, 1981. If the execution had been carried out immediately at that time, he would not have become president. Kim Jae-gyu was sentenced to death for the assassination of President Park Chung-hee and executed immediately. If Kim Dae-jung had been executed as well, he would not have become president of the Republic of Korea. However, he was released without being executed, even though he had been sentenced to death. When we see that, he was able to rise to the position of president of a country where he had been sentenced to death. Where he had been sentenced to death, the expression died and came back to life becomes more realistic. One of the 7 heads was wounded and died, but after it healed, it became the head, that is, one of the most powerful people. This is the case of Lenin, who successfully led the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and initiated the beginning of the Soviet Socialist state. Let's take a quick look at Lenin's biography. Lenin was born on April 22, 1870 in the Russian Old Calendar, in Simbirsk on the Volga River as the 4th child of the Ulyanov couple. The Volga region was home to many Tatars, Mortvinans, and Chuvash peoples. It was also the place where several uprisings took place in Russian history. Among them, in particular, Stepan Razin, who led the Cossack uprising near the Volga River and the Caspian Sea in 1667, and was defeated at Simbirsk in 1670. And Pugachev, the leader of the Cossack people who opposed Russian absolutism during the reign of Peter III. In the 17th and 18th centuries. Hermann Weber, Lenin. Lenin's older brother Alexander was executed in 1887 for his involvement in the assassination of the Tsar. Lenin was subject to the system of collective punishment and was restricted from going to university. But thanks to his mother's efforts, he graduated from the law school at Kazan University and was able to work as a lawyer in St. Petersburg in 1893 at the age of 23. However, Lenin was not interested in law and devoted his energy to the study of Marxism and the labor movement. The life and ideals of the Red Heroes. Lenin suffered from severe pneumonia in early 1895. After recovering his health, he left Russia for the first time and traveled to Germany, Switzerland, and France. During that time, he connected with members of the Marxist circle who were living in exile, and also got to know Plekhanov, a leading theoretician of Russian Marxism. This trip was very stimulating for Lenin. In July 1895, Lenin went to a resort in Switzerland to treat his stomach ailment and went to Berlin in late July. Lenin returned to Russia on September 19, carrying Marxist books with him. On October 11, he returned to Petersburg, and together with his future enemy Yuli Martov, formed a Marxist group within the Petersburg League of Struggle for the Liberation of the Working Class. While this struggle was in full swing, on the night of December 2021, 1895, Lenin was arrested along with his comrades. Lenin was held in solitary confinement in the investigative department's detention center for 18 months. He was in poor health. On February 10, 1897, the authorities deported Lenin to eastern Siberia and ordered him to remain under police surveillance for 3 years. The police department's report for December 1896 reads, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, assistant lawyer, responsible for the events in the Petersburg Social Democratic Circle, in custody since December 9, 1895. The Minister of Justice proposed a 3-year banishment to eastern Siberia. The police department agreed to this view. The record with the registration number 2778 was returned to the Ministry of Justice on December 18. Hermann Weber, Lenin. In February 1900, Lenin finally returned to St. Petersburg after completing his exile. He was 30 years old at the time. Lenin decided to leave for abroad immediately. On July 29, 1900, he went to Munich, Germany, and obtained an office to publish a new newspaper, Iskra. The word Iskra means spark in Russian, and the title can be seen as a reflection of Lenin's belief that the newspaper should be the spark that would bring down the Tsarist regime in Russia. Shortly after the publication of What Is to Be Done in March 1902, Iskra moved its offices to London, England. The core of Lenin's argument in What Is to Be Done was that only a controlled revolutionary movement, comprised of professional revolutionary workers, and led by a solid, consistent organization of leaders could liberate workers from the oppression of the bourgeoisie and arm them with socialism. In October 1902, while living in London, Lenin met Leon Trotsky, a revolutionary in his 20s who had read Iskra and came to visit him. Joseph Stalin also read the newspaper and became Lenin's supporter. John Honey, A World History Through People, Lenin. In this way, Iskra played a very important role in Lenin's journey. From his exile in Europe to the success of the October Revolution in 1917 and his rise to power. The above is a brief excerpt from Lenin's life. After this journey, Lenin returned to Russia in a sealed train in 1917 and led the October Revolution. On November 7, October 25 in the Russian Old Calendar, he wrote the proclamations of the victory of the October Revolution to the citizens of Russia and to the workers, soldiers, and peasants. And on November 8–9, at the Second Congress of the Soviets, Lenin was elected chairman of the People's Committee and head of government. Hermann Weber, Lenin. Lenin's older brother was executed for treason. Likewise, if the authorities had considered Lenin a threat to the system, When he was arrested and imprisoned and executed him, he would not have become the top leader of the Soviet Union. Even when he was exiled to Siberia, no one thought he would be a person who opened a new era in the future. But had been charged with treason and executed, he would not have ascended to the top position of the Soviet regime. However, when he, who had spent his years in exile, came to the forefront of history, countless Russians raised their hands and followed him, allowing him to become the first leader of the Soviet Socialist Republic. The meaning of the one who was wounded to death and whose wound was healed, recorded in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3, can be explained as follows. Although he had suffered from severe pneumonia, I think the meaning in the text should be seen as a political meaning, rather than a person who was sick and then came back to life. The fact that he was arrested, detained, and exiled, and his political life was almost cut off. But he recovered from his status as a person who was captured, seems closer to the meaning in the text. In other words, it should be seen as a situation in which he was able to return from exile and ascend to the position of the highest power in the country. Another figure who cannot be left out when discussing the Soviet Union, along with Lenin, is Stalin. Stalin was captured 7 times between 1902 and 1913, and exiled to Siberia, escaping 6 times. His exile in Siberia, which began in 1913, continued until 1917. Brenda Haugen, Stalin, the failed revolutionary in the swamp of power. If Lenin or Stalin had not been exiled but executed, they would not have ascended to power, and the situation of the Russian Revolution would have unfolded quite differently. In addition, Stalin was appointed to a key position that decided the party's policies at the party convention, held in Prague, Czechoslovakia in 1912, upon Lenin's recommendation. However, Lenin was concerned about Stalin's rough personality just before he died. Tried to have Stalin step down from his position. Thomas Hubler, A World History Through People, Stalin. A letter left by Lenin on January 4, 1923. Stalin is too rough. This defect is tolerable when interacting with comrades or communists, but it is not an acceptable problem when performing the duties of the Secretary General. For this reason, I asked my comrades to consider how we can force Stalin to step down. To step down and give this position to someone else. Hermann Weber, Lenin. If Lenin had lived a little longer. Considering Lenin's powerful influence in the early days of the revolution, Stalin probably would not have remained in that position, and would not have ascended to the position of the highest power in the Soviet Union. However, Lenin, who fell, could not rise again, and Stalin, who survived, eventually opened the era of a one-man dictator. During his reign, he communized the remaining republics that made up the Soviet Union. And after World War II, Eastern Europe also became communist. The Korean peninsula was broken in half by the person he put forward. In 1950, the Korean War broke out due to Kim Il-sung, whom he had put forward. This Stalin also has the appearance of someone who died and came back to life. There is another meaning. Died and came back to life. The Chinese character used as a pronoun for the name of the Soviet Union is so. So means to come back to life, to revive. The character was chosen because it has the same pronunciation and sound as the so of the Soviet Union. And coincidentally, its meaning is to revive, meaning to die and come back to life. When the Chinese character was first chosen, no one realized this meaning and intentionally wrote it. But they simply chose the character with the same pronunciation. But surprisingly, the meaning matches. It is also the same as the phonetic value of the Korean alphabet. This means that when God planned this, He made the name of the country of Babylon. This means that God has made the sound and meaning of words coincide. It is truly amazing and mysterious. Last time, we revealed that the most important entity in the book of Revelation, The seven-headed, ten-horned beast is the Soviet Union. We found a history that exactly matches the description of the existence of the beast nation, Babylon, described in the Book of Revelation and the text of the prophecy. 7 rulers led the Soviet Union for 70 years. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, 10 new countries became independent. It is the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. We found a historical empire that had 7 heads and 10 horns. There are several nicknames for this Babylon in the text of the prophecy. This time, we learned about the one who died and came back to life. The Soviet Union is the empire that was ruled by 7 supreme rulers for 70 years and then fell. However, the Chinese character that refers to the Soviet Union is so, which means to revive, meaning to die and come back to life. Also, the 2 main figures who created the Soviet Union, Lenin and Stalin, also had a life journey similar to the meaning of this name. They were politically sentenced to death, but they were dramatically revived and created the beast called the Soviet Union. I realized that the beast in the prophecy refers to the empire that devours weak countries. The Book of Revelation and World History are both composed of 12 chapters. Among them, Chapter 1, The Identity of the Seven-Headed Beast, consists of 15 subheadings. Next time, we will look at Section 12, Babylon the Great. In Section 13, The Name of the Secret, the identity of the seven-headed, ten-horned beast will become clearer. Please, continue to show interest and subscribe. This was the Bible History School. Thank you very much for reading to the end. Hello. This is the Bible History School. This is the 9th hour of Revelation and World History. During the last hour, we began the grand journey of Revelation and World History. And now, we've come to this point. Out of the total 12 chapters, we are currently learning about Chapter 1, the identity of the seven-headed beast. Chapter 1 has a total of 15 subtables. From the first hour to the last hour, we have been discussing the titles up to Chapter 1, Section 11. Up until the last hour, we have learned about the identity of the seven-headed beast and 10 horns that appear in the Book of Revelation. It was the history of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was established in December 1922, under the leadership of Stalin. On December 25, 1991, President Gorbachev declared the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And it disappeared into the back alleys of history. Its existence lasted exactly 70 years. During that 70-year period, the number of top power holders who ruled the Soviet Union was 7. Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. The Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics. Among them, the 3 Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had already become independent and joined the UN before the declaration of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was dissolved, 12 republics remained. Among them, Georgia did not join the Commonwealth of Independent States due to the Civil War. On December 8, 1991, when the Commonwealth of Independent States was founded, the 3 member states were Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Then, on December 21, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan joined, forming the Commonwealth of Independent States. With the exception of Georgia, 11 republics. Finally, on December 25, 1991, Gorbachev, then president of the Soviet Union, declared the official dissolution of the Soviet Union. Among the countries that gained independence from the Soviet Union, 10 countries, excluding Russia, were newly independent states. When these 10 republics, including the republics, came together to give strength to the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union had the appearance of a superpower. This is consistent with the situation in Revelation chapter 17, verse 13. They had one mind and gave their power and authority to the beast. And when these republics declared independence, the monster called the Soviet Union, that suddenly appeared in human history in the 20th century, suddenly disappeared. This situation is exactly consistent with the Bible's statement that these 10 horns destroyed the beast nation Babylon. We have found a history that exactly matches the content of the prophecy that mentions the 7-headed beast and the 10 horns. In the Bible, the name of the beast nation, named Babylon, is expressed in various ways. It describes the nature of the Red Empire. We will substitute each of these names into the Soviet Union and verify whether the Soviet Union is indeed the beast mentioned in the prophecy. Last time, among them, we looked at the name, the one who died and resurrected. This time, we will look at another nickname for this red beast. Chapter 1, Section 12. The Great City of Babylon. Let's look at the words of Revelation chapter 17. The woman that you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Revelation chapter 17, verse 18. This great city refers to the Kremlin. The word Kremlin in Russian means fortress or citadel, and the word itself means a large castle. During the Soviet era, it was where the highest leadership of the Soviet Union was located. Even now that the Soviet Union has collapsed, the Kremlin is where the central office of the Russian government is located. In South Korea, it means the Blue House. And in the United States, it means the White House. It is used to mean the center of the highest power of a country. The Kremlin is the center of power not only in the Soviet Union, but also in communist countries around the world. Rule over the kings of the earth means. It points to the fact that the top Soviet power in the Kremlin was commanding all the communist countries. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Revelation chapter 17, verse 5. This means that the Soviet Union became the overlord of all communist countries. Chapter 1, Section 13. The name of secret. Let's look at the words of Revelation chapter 17 again. And on his forehead was written a name, a secret. Revelation chapter 17, verse 5. In a speech given by British Prime Minister Churchill in Fulton, Missouri during his visit to the United States on March 5, 1946, he said, "From Stettin to Trieste, an iron curtain stretched." Refer to the Iron Curtain, entry in Pascal's World Encyclopedia. This was a term used to criticize the closed and secretive foreign policy of the Soviet Union and the Communist Eastern Bloc. This is how the Soviet Union was given the nickname of secret. China has been nicknamed the bamboo curtain, meaning less of an iron curtain. All because of the communist regime's secrecy. We have so far revealed that the most central entity in the book of Revelation, the 7-headed, 10-horned beast, is the Soviet Union. We have found a history that exactly matches the existence of Babylon recorded in the book of Revelation and the text of the prophecies. 7 rulers led the Soviet Union for 70 years. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, 10 new countries became independent. It is the Commonwealth of Independent States. We have found a historical empire that has the appearance of 7 heads and 10 horns. There are various nicknames for this Babylon in the text of the prophecy. Last time, we learned about the one who died and came back to life. The Soviet Union is an empire that was collapsed. The Soviet Union is an empire that was collapsed after 7 supreme rulers ruled for 70 years. The Chinese character for the Soviet Union is so, which means to revive. It also means to come back to life. Also, the two people who created the Soviet Union, Lenin and Stalin, had a life journey similar to the meaning of their names. They were politically sentenced to death, but were dramatically revived and created the beast called the Soviet Union. We learned that in the Book of Prophecy, the beast refers to an empire that devours weak countries. The Book of Revelation and World History are both composed of 12 chapters. Among them, Chapter 1, The Identity of the Seven-Headed Beast, consists of 15 subheadings. This time, we looked at Section 12, Babylon the Great, and Section 13, The Secret Name. Babylon the Great was none other than Kremlin. The word Kremlin itself means great castle or fortress. Kremlin refers to the supreme authority that commands all communist countries, including the Soviet Union, and based on the secrecy policy of these communist countries, they were given the nicknames Iron Curtain and Bamboo Curtain. The identity of the seven-headed, 10-horned beast is becoming clearer. Next time is the last time of Chapter 1 of Revelation and World History. Section 14. A nation drunk on the blood of the saints, and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. In Section 15, the Scarlet Beast will follow. Next, we will start Chapter 2, with the title, The Destruction of the Great Babylon. Please continue to show interest and subscribe. This was the Bible History School. Thank you very much for reading to the end. Hello, this is the Bible History School. This is the 10th lesson on Revelation and World History. This lesson is the last lesson on Revelation and World History, Chapter 1. The identity of the seven-headed, 10-horned beast. Up until last lesson, we learned about the identity of the seven-headed beast and 10 horns that appear in the book of Revelation. It was the history of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was established in December 1922, under the leadership of Stalin. On December 25, 1991, it disappeared into the back alleys of history. With the declaration of dissolution of the Soviet Union by President Gorbachev of the Union, its existence lasted exactly 70 years. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 11 republics came together to form the Commonwealth of Independent States. Of the 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union, the 3 Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had already declared independence and joined the United Nations before the Soviet Union declared its dissolution. Therefore, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, 12 republics remained. Of these, Georgia did not join the Commonwealth of Independent States, due to the Civil War. Of the 11 countries that participated in the Commonwealth of Independent States, Russia had already been an empire for a long time. Of the countries that gained independence from the Soviet Union, 10 countries, excluding Russia, were newly independent states. When the republics including these 10 countries came together to give strength to the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union had the appearance of a superpower. This is consistent with the situation in Revelation chapter 17, verse 13. They had one mind and gave their power and authority to the beast. And these republics declared independence. In the 20th century, the empire called the Soviet Union suddenly appeared and suddenly disappeared. This is exactly what the Bible says. These 10 horns destroyed the beast kingdom of Babylon. We have found a history that exactly matches the content of the prophecy that mentions the seven-headed beast and the 10 horns. In the Bible, the name of this beast nation named Babylon is expressed in various ways. It describes the nature and shape of that empire. We are now moving forward by substituting each of these names into the Soviet Union and verifying whether the Soviet Union is indeed the beast mentioned in the prophecy. Last time, among them, we learned about Section 11, those who died and came back to life. Section 12, the great city of Babylon. And Section 13, the name called Secret. This time, it is the last time of Chapter 1, of Revelation and World History. We will learn about Section 14, a nation drunk on the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And Section 15, the Scarlet Beast. Chapter 1, Section 14. A nation drunk on the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Continuing, let's look at the words of Revelation chapter 17. And I saw the woman, drunk on the blood of the saints, and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled, and wondered with great wonder. Revelation chapter 17, verse 6. Here, drunk with the blood of the saints, and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. The meaning of this phrase is, this country or its people are closely related to Christianity. Russia was the first country to become communist. However, Russia was originally a Christian country. Russia accepted Christianity in 988 AD under Grand Duke Vladimir. By baptizing all the people, and making them believe in Christianity, Russia became a Christian country. Referenced from Kim Kyung-mook's Story of Russian History. However, during the Stalin era in the Soviet Union, all worship and religious books were banned. And many churches were converted into movie theaters or destroyed. Due to the worsening religious persecution, religious life was restricted. Referenced from Brenda Haugen's Stalin, the failed revolutionary stuck in the swamp of power. Then, due to Gorbachev's open policy, in 1988, a large-scale event was held to commemorate the 1000th anniversary of the Russian Orthodox Church. The 1000th anniversary of the baptism of Rus. Referenced from Nicholas Sertov's Russian Orthodox History. It is surprising that Stalin himself, who was a seminarian, persecuted Christianity so much. In this way, the phrase drunk on the blood of saints refers to the history of Russia. Russia has been a Christian country for a long time. It refers to the history of the Soviet Union, a communist empire, suppressing religious freedom and persecuting the church. Revelation and World History, Chapter 1, Section 15. Scarlet Beast. Lastly, let's look at the words of Revelation chapter 17, again. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, holding a golden cup in her hand. Revelation chapter 17, verse 3-4. Scarlet beast is the description that most clearly shows the nature or shape of this empire. Scarlet clothes can be reminiscent of the Roman army, adorning themselves in red and carrying red flags. So the beast that appears in the book of Revelation is sometimes interpreted as the Roman Empire. However, the color that symbolizes the Soviet Union and communism is also red. The expression, red, is always included before names that symbolize the Soviet Union, such as Red Army, Red Square, and Red Star. The Soviet flag fluttering in Red Square is also red. The red beast is the color that symbolizes the Soviet Union, and the color red symbolizes revolution. In this way, the reality and symbols of the Soviet Union correspond to the appearance of the beast in the book of Revelation. We have so far revealed that the most important entity in the book of Revelation, the seven-headed, 10-horned beast, is the Soviet Union. We have found a history that exactly matches the description of the existence of the beast nation, Babylon, described in the book of Revelation and the text of the prophecy. 7 rulers led the Soviet Union for 70 years. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, 10 new countries became independent. It is the Commonwealth of Independent States. We have found a historical empire with the appearance of 7 heads and 10 horns. There are several nicknames for this Babylon in the text of the prophecy. Last time, we learned about Section 11, the one who was dead and resurrected. Section 12, the Great Babylon. And Section 13, the name of secret. This time, as the last time of Chapter 1, of Revelation and World History, we learned about Section 14, a nation drunk on the blood of the saints, and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And Section 15, a red beast. The Soviet Union is an empire that was destroyed after 7 supreme rulers ruled for 70 years. The Chinese character that refers to the Soviet Union is so, which means to revive, meaning to die and come back to life. In addition, the 2 main figures who created the Soviet Union, Lenin and Stalin, also had a life journey similar to the meaning of their names. They were politically sentenced to death, but they were dramatically revived and created the beast called the Soviet Union. We learned that in the book of prophecy, the beast refers to an empire that devours weak countries. The book of Revelation and world history are both composed of 12 chapters. Among them, Chapter 1, the identity of the 7-headed beast, consists of 15 subtitles. With this time, we have finished the lectures on Chapter 1 of the book of Revelation and world history. The Great Babylon was none other than the Kremlin. The word Kremlin itself means great castle or fortress. Kremlin refers to the supreme authority that commands all communist countries, including the Soviet Union. And based on the secrecy policy of these communist countries, they were given the nicknames Iron Curtain and Bamboo Curtain. A country drunk on the blood of saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus refers to the fact that Russia was a Christian country. And it refers to the history of destroying many church buildings and persecuting Christians during the Soviet era. The red beast is a symbol of the Soviet Union, including the Red Army, Red Square, and Red Star. The Soviet flag fluttering in Red Square is also red, symbolizing revolution. The identity of the Babylonian Empire has become clearer. Next time, we will start Chapter 2 of Revelation and World History. The Bible History School will start Chapter 2 with the title, The Destruction of the Great Babylon. Chapter 1 mainly deals with the origins and form of Babylon. The content of Chapter 2 will discuss the nature and rise and fall of Babylon. This was the Bible History School. Subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Revelation and world history. Thank you very much.